Well, I'm delighted that I am interviewing my next guest. I've never interviewed her before, and she does such incredible campaigning work to raise the issues in regard to anti-Semitism in this country and indeed beyond. Nicole Lampert is a journalist and campaigns against anti-Semitism. Nicole, it's a privilege to have you on this programme. Thank you for joining me today. And I wonder what you think about the things that are happening every day. There are just so many different examples. We'll talk about the BBC in a second, but I mean, I've got articles in front of me about a teenage girl pelted with bottles in a suspected hate crime in Stamford Hill because she's Jewish. We've got Jewish children left terrified as thugs pelt their London school bus with rocks before storming it and yelling "F Israel," while frightened pupils cower behind seats. This is just awful, Nicole, and it seems to be getting worse.
Peter, and thank you for your kind words. It does feel like it's getting worse. I feel like we're kind of now heading into a violent stage, which we perhaps weren't before. Well, I think the violence has always been underpinning the pro-Palestine movement. And we're also just seeing the results of a year of war and a year of kind of relentless propaganda against Jews and the Israeli state. And although, of course, they're not the same thing, they become the same thing in many people's eyes. And perhaps what happened to those kids from JFS is an example of that, and that these are Jewish children. No one knows whether they're Zionists or not, or what their political feelings are. And the ones I spoke to were 11 and 12, so they probably don't have strong feelings about the war. But all they know is that what happened is that when their bus stopped at a bus stop to drop some pupils off, a few teenagers from another school got on, started swearing at them, taking videos of them, and then got off, and there were about 10 kids that were then throwing rocks and bits of rubbish at their bus. I spoke to a couple of the kids, and they were so terrified and so sweet and innocent, and it kind of made me think about this time that every Jewish parent has to go through, even in times not like this, where you have to answer the question, why do people hate Jews? You know, we have the story of the Holocaust on our backs. We have various other stories of genocides throughout the years and the decades and the generations. And this is our story, and we're all seeing it played out almost in our streets every day.
And I mean, the thing is that you're meant to rely on certain organisations. You're a journalist, I'm a journalist, like the BBC, for example, to be an impartial organisation. We've seen reports, a big report that was done that gave many, many examples of the BBC not being fair in regard to the Middle East, not being fair when it came to the issue of anti-Semitism. But I want to praise a number of BBC journalists who have quit their union after they were urged to wear the colours of the Palestinian flag or a Palestinian scarf to mark a day of action for Palestine, as it was called. Jewish staff members at the BBC were left shocked after being invited to take part in the protest set up by the umbrella union organisation, the Trades Union Congress. They're calling for a permanent ceasefire of the union, the cessation of violence in Gaza, the release of all hostages. There should certainly be the release of all hostages. But it was shared with members of the National Union of Journalists as it condemned the Israeli government's attacks. And they said it's led to the deaths of 135 Palestinian journalists since October the 7th, since the 7th of October 2023. I mean, the fact is that Palestinian journalists in Gaza are often not journalists. They're often agents of Hamas terrorists. But that's not the point. The point is, with this particular thing, the union, the TUC, has... I mean, I just wonder how on earth they thought this was in any way appropriate for any workplace, never mind the BBC. I mean, we've had arguments about cultural appropriation and things like that previously. That's by the by. The point is that the BBC is supposed to be an impartial organisation. I mean, how on earth could it even begin, Nicole, to argue that had these people taken part in that day of action?
Well, I think there's two elements to this, aren't there? There's two things to unpack. One is the partiality or not of the BBC, and my main job is, something that I've been for 20, 30 years, is an entertainment journalist. I know many people at the BBC. I work closely with the BBC, and I've never had a year where I felt so disappointed in an organisation where I've seen this non-neutrality, and I think it's genuinely dangerous, because the BBC is one of the most trusted brands in the UK. It's trusted around the world as a kind of neutral organisation, but on this subject, it's anything but neutral and has been from the start, taking Hamas figures as gospel and questioning every single thing that the IDF, which is governed by all the rules that all the other Western military organisations are governed by. They kind of question everything that the IDF says while taking Hamas as gospel.
It's when they say, and it drives me up the wall, Nicole, it's when they say health officials in Gaza say this number of people have been killed in the conflict and so on. First of all, they don't break it down by terrorists versus innocent people, and also health officials in Gaza are Hamas officials, and Hamas is a terrorist organisation. In fact, that's not me saying that. The UK designates Hamas as a terrorist organisation, so that should be made clear, and it often isn't. And this fog is just descending an awful lot. And when you have suggestions that people should be wearing Palestinian colours or a keffiyeh, for example, I mean, that to me is just going far beyond anything that's appropriate in any workplace, never mind a supposedly impartial broadcasting organisation.
Exactly, and I think what people may not understand or perhaps seeing from this is there's this weird marriage of the far left, which represented by people at the top of the TUC and at the top of the NUJ, and extremist Islam. And for the far left, the idea is to create disorder in our streets so that they can get the socialist revolution that they've always hoped for. And they see the Palestinian cause as one that unites various factions. So that's why you have these two. So we can see demonstrations that you've got footage of that now, and there's more demonstrations today, and they're often SWP banners, and that's because of this strange marriage. And these people, they've taken over the unions. And so when the TUC puts out something like this to the NUJ, which is meant to be impartial in itself, let alone before it sends it out to its journalists, but also this letter went out to teaching unions, to people that work at the NHS. So this is just a huge issue. But in terms of the BBC and the NUJ, I've got friends at the BBC. Almost everyone that I know who works there who is Jewish is incredibly miserable, and they feel like they're working in a hostile place where people that they're working with are overtly working against them, or not overtly, but they feel that there is an institutional bias at the BBC. But so for the NUJ to send this out to BBC people was absolutely ridiculous, and so you can see why they're finally taking action and leaving. But to be honest, most Jewish people that I know that were members of the NUJ left quite some time ago because of its bias.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters are set to clash with Black Friday shopping, Winter Wonderland festivities. London, we don't want to be too London-centric. Of course, 82% of our viewers and listeners to this station live outside London, but we do know that these marches continue. We know that the anti-Semitism that is part of some of these marches, some of the people on these marches are anti-Semitic. Many of them are, I would say, and that continues, and that is going to have a big impact, which actually isn't talked enough about, not just on Jewish people right throughout the UK and beyond, but also on the economy of this country, Nicole. Yet these marches continue. There's going to be counter-protests as well today. I just wonder, do you see any end in sight to these marches? Certainly, I would imagine as long as the conflict goes on in the Middle East, they will continue. But it cannot be a particularly conducive atmosphere to people even going in, Jewish or otherwise, going into where these protests are, and certainly for the economy of these cities where they're taking place as well.
Yeah, and of course it's not just happening in London, it's happening in most of the major big cities, and it's week in and week out, and it does put off, we know it puts off shoppers, and it puts off theatre-goers, it puts people off booking restaurants in the city, knowing that there is this large group of people. Some of them, lots of them maybe perhaps they do want peace, but there's a lot of them that there is this undercurrent of violence, and they want to cause anger, and that they want to kind of cause a fuss. And of course, this weekend is one of the biggest shopping weekends of the year. And the other aspect of this is the policing of it, because these are violent protests, violent and anti-Semitic protests, and the policing just in London alone is around 50 million. Is about 50 million just this in the last 12 months. So it's had a massive effect on our economy. In terms of when this will end, I hope it will end when the war ends, but it feels like there's this movement that's been building, and I don't think they're going to want to stop just because the war has ended. We can see it the way it's affected already. It's become more than just about anti-Israel. It's become against anyone who calls themselves a Zionist. So I've written a story this week about a Jewish person who, because she's a Zionist, there's been moves to get her taken off museum boards because she's a big philanthropist in the art world. So I can't see this hatred ending, and that's something that I think Jewish people are discussing around the dinner tables every week. Do we have a future in this country?
Do you think you have a future in this country, Nicole?
I really hope so. I don't know, to be honest. I hope so. I hope it will die down. But I think every Jewish person in this country has seen an aspect of this country, not only the hatred, but also the silence of many people who can see how bad it is and aren't doing enough to stop it, including the police, I'm afraid to say.
Actually, let's talk about the police for a second, because there is a lot of silence. There's a lot of silence in lots of different areas of this entire thing. I mean, one of the things I was talking about with an Israeli friend just recently, actually, was about the hostages and the fact that, you know, I'm sure you remember Boko Haram and their kidnapping of young girls. Bring back our girls. Where's Michelle Obama now? Where's Gwyneth Paltrow? Where's the people you cover in your showbiz beat and your entertainment reporting? Nicole, where are they? Where are the celebrity influencers here saying, I mean, I know there are some of them, but they're just not nearly enough to say either in the Israeli aspect and the hostages, or actually to stand up and to fight about the problems, fight in the sense, not obviously violently, but actually just to stand up for people who are Jewish. I wonder as well, not just the celebrities, but also, I mean, I'm not Jewish, but what do you think? I asked a number of guests this question, and I wonder what you think, you know, ordinary people perhaps watching or listening to this can do to help our Jewish friends and neighbours, because they've, you know, anti-Semitism is a tale as old as time, but at the same time it has been far worse in this country since the 7th of October and the war in the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the silence of the celebrities, it's a tragedy, but I think it kind of underpins how people are frightened of the pro-Palestinian side. They get death threats, they get trolled, they literally worried about their families, because that's the extent of the danger that they feel that they're in. Quite a few months ago, I was in Israel. I interviewed the family of Naama Levy, who she's become one of the kind of iconic images of hostage taking. She was she was 19 at the time. She was taken in her pajamas, and people will remember the video of her bloodied trousers, which may be a sign of sexual violence, being pushed into a car in Gaza and people screaming outside. And her father told me about some of the acts that she adored, including Pink, including Michelle Obama. And I wrote the story deliberately in an American paper, in the New York Post, and tried separately through various different channels to get some of these people to speak out, and no one would respond. And I think a lot of that is just fear. I'm not sure if that's fair to say about Michelle Obama, because presumably she does have security. So is there more to it? Is there... Do they even think that they shouldn't say something, or because they don't want to be shown to be partial? I really don't know. But the silence of so many people is one of the depressing aspects. But you're right, that there are lots of people that do want to stand with us. And there are only, there are less than 300,000 Jewish people in this country. So you may not even know a Jewish person. But if you see any online, please reach out and just say, I'm standing with you, because something like that can make an amazing difference, because there are days when everyone I speak to in the Jewish community just feels really low and depressed. And as I said, not sure whether we have a future in this country. And there is going to be a big anti-Semitism march on next Sunday, on I think it's the 8th of December. There is, I will post about it on my Twitter, but you can find it. It's been organised with a campaign against anti-Semitism.
Yep.
And it's just a way of saying to people, we stand with you, and we stand against what is being done to this community that's been here for many, many generations. Part of my family goes back to the time when Oliver Cromwell allowed Jews back into this country. You know, I think as a community, we've added huge value to this country.
Of course, of course.
It would be nice for people to show that they support us.
Well, I think that there's a lot of food for thought there, and thank you so much, Nicole. Please keep doing exactly what you're doing. You're a bit of a hero, to be honest, Nicole, so thank you very, very much indeed for